The morning began like most others in my quiet Portland neighborhood. Rain beating on the kitchen window, the scent of coffee drifting from the old French press, and the faint hum of the refrigerator that had been with me longer than most people in my life. I was halfway through sorting invoices for the bookstore cafe when the phone rang. The number on the screen was from Seattle, and the name Marcus Hale. Attorney at law pulled me upright. Mrs. Marlowe, he began in that measured voice lawyers seem to practice. I'm calling about the estate of your late aunt, Margaret Ellsworth. I hadn't seen Aunt Margaret in 3 years, but her sharp wit and the way she made you feel like the only person in the room had never left me. I expected a mention of an heirloom, maybe a modest sum. Instead, Marcus said, the probate process has concluded. You are the sole beneficiary of her trust. Its value is approximately $120 million. The words felt like they belonged to someone else's life. I gripped the edge of the counter, staring at the rain sliding down the glass. My voice wavered when I thanked him. He explained the process, assured me the funds were ready for transfer, and promised to send documents by courier. When I hung up, the house was silent except for my own heartbeat. I thought of the years after Nathan died working double shifts, skipping dinners out, taking on bookkeeping clients just to keep the lights on. I thought of Callum, my only child, and the countless nights I stayed awake worrying about his tuition, his rent, his future. Now, I pictured telling him. I imagined his relief, the way his brow might finally ease. We could pay off his student loans, help him and Alina buy a home, repair the bookstore's roof, even fund scholarships in Aunt Margaret's name. I'd never met Alina, only knew from his brief mentions that she worked in corporate project management and traveled often for work. He said they'd married quietly last year. No big ceremony, just paperwork and a dinner with friends. I closed the invoices, my mind already rearranging the weekend. I would tell him face to face, in the warmth of my kitchen, with the rain tapping against the windows and a pot of his favorite stew on the stove. Some news deserves to be delivered in person by late Friday morning. My list was tucked neatly in my bag groceries for the weekend. A stop at the florist for fresh lilies. A quick run by the bookstore to drop off some ledgers. The rain had thinned to a mist, and the streets glistened under a pale sky. My mind was busy stitching together the moments of the conversation I would have with Callum, rehearsing how to ease him into the news. Traffic on Hawthorne Bridge was slow but steady. I could see the Willamette River rippling dark beneath the steel beams. The city's skyline softened by the damp air. At the far end of the bridge, the light turned green. I eased forward. The delivery truck came from my left. Too fast for the intersection, a blur of white and red letters. The impact was sudden. A violent punctuation mark in the middle of an ordinary day. Metal screamed against metal. My seatbelt snapped tight across my chest. The airbag exploded into my face with a force that rattled my teeth. Glass fractured into glittering shards that caught the gray light before raining down. Sound became muffled, like I was underwater. I tasted copper and smelled the acrid bite of deployed airbags. My right arm throbbed, pinned awkwardly against the door. Papers from my bag floated down around me, landing in my lap and on the floorboard. A face appeared at the window, lips moving, voice faint over the ringing in my ears. Someone wrenched the door open, the air rushing in cold and sharp. Hands guided me onto a stretcher. The sky above the bridge narrowed to a rectangle framed by the ambulance roof. The paramedic asked for a contact number. Without thinking, I gave Clara's name first, then Callum's. The order didn't strike me until later. When the siren rose and the city blurred into a wash of gray and blue. As we sped toward the hospital, my thoughts drifted to Nathan's laugh, the creak of the old stairs in my house, and Callum's face the day he left for college. The paramedic's voice cut through, steady and close, asking me to stay awake as the wheels rolled me into the light. I woke to the antiseptic brightness of a hospital room, the sheets stiff and the air heavy with the hum of machines. My shoulder was strapped in a sling, my ribs wrapped tight, and a dull ache pulsed in my collarbone with every breath. The last clear image I remembered was the steel frame of the bridge flashing past the window before everything shattered. A pitcher of water and a plastic cup sat on the tray beside me. My phone was there too, screen dark, as if it had been waiting for me to wake. I picked it up and dialed Callum. "Mom," he answered, his tone clipped. "I was in an accident," I began, my voice unsteady. "I'm in the hospital. I'm swamped." "Mom," he cut in. "Alina and I have things going on. I can't just drop everything. You'll be fine. You always are. I could use I don't have time for this, or for a loser sitting around in bed," he said, and then the line went dead. The words settled in me like cold water. I stared at the phone, waiting for it to light up again with a call back, an apology, anything. It didn't. The next 2 days blurred together. The nurse assigned to me, Penelope, moved with the calm precision of someone who knew when to talk and when to let the quiet work. She brought fresh ice packs, adjusted my sling, and once, when I thought she wasn't looking, tucked the blanket higher around my waist. In the evenings, when the hallway dimmed and the distant sound of rolling carts softened, I found myself replaying Callum's voice. I tried to remember the last time he'd spoken to me with warmth, but the moments slipped away, replaced by sharp edges I hadn't noticed forming. On the third morning, Penelope brought in a vase of daffodils she said had been left at the nurse's station without a name. She set them on the table by my bed, their yellow a stubborn burst of color against the white walls. That was when I heard footsteps in the hall, slower and heavier than the staff's, coming toward my door. The footsteps in the hall that morning belonged to Clara, her scarf still damp from the drizzle outside, and her smile carrying more warmth than the thin hospital blankets could manage. She set a paper bag on the table, blueberry muffins from the cafe down the street, and poured us both coffee from the thermos she always carried. We spoke about the weather, about the stubborn magnolia tree in her yard that refused to bloom, about the minor gossip from our old neighborhood. The conversations were small, deliberately so, like stones placed across a river to keep us from slipping into deeper waters. I wasn't ready to wade through. Each day blurred into the next. My ribs ached, my arm throbbed, and the sling kept me from moving much beyond the bed. Penelope managed my care with quiet efficiency, and Clara kept my mind occupied. What neither of them knew, what I didn't dare say aloud, was that a check for $120 million in trust waited for my signature. I held the news close, not because I doubted them, but because I had pictured one specific moment for its release, Callum sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, hearing it from me directly on the fourth day. Clara leaned back in her chair and mentioned she'd been scrolling LinkedIn the night before. I saw a corporate group photo from a project management firm downtown. There was a woman with your son's last name in the caption, Alina Marlowe. She's striking. Is that his wife? I smiled faintly and nodded. I've heard of her, I said, careful to keep my tone even. Haven't met her yet. Clara tilted her head, clearly curious. But she didn't press. I told her I'd meet Alina when the timing felt right. The truth was, I had imagined meeting her under far kinder circumstances, perhaps over dinner in my home, not from a hospital bed with my shoulder strapped in place. That evening, after Clara left, I watched the hallway again, listening for a pair of footsteps I knew as well as my own heartbeat. None came. Only the soft squeak of nurses' shoes and the distant clatter of trays moved past my door. Until one afternoon, the sound I had been waiting for finally arrived. But not in the way I expected. 4 days had passed since the accident, when I finally heard the footsteps I'd been waiting for firm. Deliberate. Unhurried. The door swung open, and there was Callum, dressed in a tailored blazer, his hair styled as though he'd stepped out of a showroom. At his side was a woman I recognized instantly from Clara's casual mention, Alina. She was tall, polished, and carried herself like she'd rehearsed every movement. Her dark hair was pinned neatly, her coat draped over one arm. The air between them felt staged, as though this entrance had been planned. "Mom," Callum said, drawing the word out in a tone that wasn't quite warm. "You look comfortable. Must be nice, lying around while the rest of us are out there working." I tried to ignore the sting of his words. "It's good to see you," I said, my voice steady. "This is Alina." Alina gave a small nod but didn't meet my eyes. Her gaze skimmed the flowers on the table, the pitcher of water, anywhere but my face. She murmured something polite, almost inaudible. Before stepping closer to the foot of the bed, Callum moved to stand where he blocked part of my view of her, leaning casually on the bed's railing. "We thought we'd stop by," he continued, "since you seem to have so much free time lately. Didn't want you to feel too lonely." His smirk made it clear this wasn't a visit born of concern. I folded my hands in my lap, letting the silence stretch. Eventually, Alina shifted, and her eyes finally lifted to meet mine. For the first time. She seemed to really see me. Her expression faltered. The polite detachment vanished, replaced by something sharper recognition. Disbelief. She blinked once, then again, as though clearing her vision. Her posture stiffened, and the color drained slightly from her cheeks. I watched her take in the room again, her gaze flicking between me and Callum, as though trying to align two pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. The tension settled heavy in the air, so palpable that even Callum seemed to notice her change in demeanor. Alina's lips parted slightly, as though she was about to say something, and I felt the moment teeter on the edge of breaking wide open. Alina's voice cut through the room before anyone seemed ready for it. "Oh my God, she's my CEO!" The words hung in the air, suspended between disbelief and certainty. Callum straightened, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before he barked out a short, awkward laugh. "What? Don't be ridiculous. Mom's retired, basically. She runs a little bookstore. You must be mistaken." But Alina didn't look away from me now. Her eyes were steady. "Searching. I'm not mistaken," she said. Each word measured. "Evelina Marlowe. I've seen your name on board memos. You chaired the last strategy meeting remotely. From Portland? You own Ellison and Rowe." Callum turned toward her, his smirk fading. "Alina. You must be thinking of someone else." "My mother doesn't." "She does," Alina interrupted, her tone firm. "She's the majority shareholder. She's my boss's boss." I sat back against the pillows, watching the shape of the truth settle into the space between them. The discomfort bloomed slowly, thickening the air. I didn't rush to confirm or deny. Silence, I'd learned long ago, can be sharper than any rebuttal. Callum shifted his weight, his bravado thinning under the weight of Alina's certainty. Even if that's true, he said finally. It's not like he stopped himself, glancing at me as if trying to gauge how much I'd let him get away with in front of his wife. Alina's gaze flicked between us, and I could see the quiet calculation in her eyes. She was piecing together why her husband might not have wanted her to meet me until now. Why the picture he'd painted of his family didn't quite match the reality in front of her. The room felt smaller with each passing second, the unspoken truths crowding in. I kept my expression neutral, letting them both sit in the knowledge without giving them a way out. Callum opened his mouth again, perhaps to change the subject or reclaim control of the conversation. But before he could speak, a brisk knock sounded at the door. It swung open to reveal Marcus Hale, holding a leather folder under his arm and scanning the room with a lawyer's quick, comprehensive eye. Marcus stepped inside, the scent of rain still clinging to his coat, and closed the door behind him with quiet finality. He gave a polite nod to Callum and Alina before turning his full attention to me. "Mrs. Marlowe," he said, placing the leather folder on the rolling tray beside my bed. "The trust documents from your aunt's estate are ready for signature. Upon execution, you will have full control of $120 million in assets." The number, spoken aloud in this small hospital room, seemed to pull the air taut. Callum's head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing as though trying to see if Marcus was playing some elaborate joke. Alina said nothing, but I caught the way her shoulders stiffened. Marcus continued, "Matter of fact, we can review the terms now, or I can return when you're ready." Callum's voice came quickly. "Too casual to be sincere. Maybe we should talk privately. Mom, figure out the best way forward. Keep things in the family." I looked at him, and in the span of a heartbeat, the days in this bed replayed themselves, his cold voice on the phone, the silence that followed, the way he'd stood at the end of my bed with nothing but criticism to offer. The words "no time for a loser" still carried their sting. "There's nothing to work out." "Callum," I said evenly. "Marcus, let's proceed." The lawyer flipped open the folder, sliding the pen into my left hand so I could avoid the shoulder still bound in its sling. The paper felt heavier than its weight. Every stroke of ink a line drawn between what had been and what would never be again. When I set the pen down, Marcus closed the folder with a quiet click. The sound was final, the way a lock engages. Callum shifted as if to speak again, but the expression on my face must have told him that whatever arrangement he had in mind would never see daylight. Marcus tucked the folder under his arm and glanced toward the door, just as the sound of rain began again against the window. Within a week of signing the trust documents, I was sitting in Marcus's office, the soft hum of the city outside his window. Papers were spread neatly across the walnut desk, asset protection filings, amendments to my will, and instructions for my estate plan. I initialed and signed, each page removing Callum as sole beneficiary. The changes weren't impulsive, they were deliberate, born from the clarity that had settled over me in that hospital bed. Marcus moved methodically, explaining each step without judgment. "This ensures no one can access your funds without your explicit consent," he said, sliding the next document toward me. "And this one formalizes the charitable allocations you mentioned." When we finished, he hesitated. "There's another matter. Alina has asked for representation." My brow lifted, and he continued. "She learned Callum never finalized his divorce from his first wife. Her marriage to him isn't legally valid." The words landed without surprise. Somewhere deep down, I had known that the mess in Callum's personal life was only the surface of something far more tangled. I told Marcus to proceed with whatever Alina needed to free herself cleanly. That night, alone in my kitchen, I let myself feel the loss. Not of the money of the son I had raised, the boy who once clung to my hand on the first day of school, the young man I thought I was building a future for. The grief came in waves, not loud or angry, but quiet and deep, like a tide that knows it will keep returning in the days that followed. I found my footing in new routines calls with contractors about the house, meetings about charitable initiatives, and mornings spent walking through the rain-slicked streets of Portland. I carried the ache for Callum with me, but I no longer let it steer my decisions. When Marcus called to confirm that all filings were complete, I thanked him and closed my notebook. The next thing I needed to rebuild was the place that had always held me, even when the people in it had not. The scent of fresh lumber and paint became the backdrop to my mornings. Contractors moved through the house with easy coordination. Old windows came out. A new roof took shape, and the kitchen slowly transformed from a cramped, drafty space into one that felt open and warm. Every nail driven in felt like a statement this home, and the life inside it, would be made strong again, beyond the walls. I turned my focus outward. A portion of the trust went to the women's shelter on Burnside, enough to secure beds, heat, and counseling services for years. Another share funded scholarships for young women pursuing business degrees at the community college. I invested in a handful of small local businesses, cafes, a book bindery, a tailor shop, places with owners who worked the counters themselves. When Alina reached out, I agreed to meet her at a quiet coffee shop downtown. She arrived looking more tired than polished this time, her hair loose, a paper cup already in her hands. She apologized without preamble, her voice low but steady. "I'm leaving him," she said. "I should have seen it sooner." I listened, letting her speak. When she finally looked up, I told her I believed her. "I'll help where I can," I said, "but I won't carry anyone who won't stand on their own." She nodded, understanding without argument. We finished our coffee in companionable silence. Two women connected by the same man's choices, but no longer defined by them. Back at home, the last of the scaffolding came down. The front door, newly sanded and painted deep blue, swung open easily under my hand. The house was ready for its next chapter, and so was I. Morning light poured through the new windows, softening the edges of the shaker table where my laptop sat open. The house felt different now, solid, quiet, as though it had taken a deep breath and let it out slowly. I moved easily between the rooms, no longer noticing the absence of drafts or the groan of a loose board. Work still filled my days, but on my terms. I mentored younger women starting businesses of their own, sharing the mistakes and victories I'd collected over the years. The bookstore cafe thrived with a new manager, freeing me to walk more often through the neighborhood, stopping to talk with shopkeepers or watch the river from the bridge. Portland's streets had a rhythm I'd come to know like a familiar song. Belonging here didn't come from what I owned, but from how I chose to stand in it. The inheritance had opened doors, but it was courage, the quiet, stubborn kind, that kept them from closing again. As I locked the front door one evening, the sun dipping low over the rooftops, I knew that what stood behind me wasn't just a house. It was proof that I could choose what stayed and what I let go.